Hi everyone, I'm Anya Parampil and you're watching Red Lines. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has paid a visit to the family of Major General Qasim Sulemani, whom the U.S. killed in a targeted airstrike in Baghdad late Thursday night. The strike killed Sulemani as well as 6 other individuals, including Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, the deputy commander of Iraq's Popular Mobilization Forces, or PMF. Sulemani was responsible for leading local forces, including the PMF, to victory in the fight against the Islamic State and is seen as a hero by citizens in Iran, Iraq, Syria, and beyond. In Tehran, mourners attended Friday prayers and took to the streets holding images of Sulemani, while President Hassan Rouhani vowed his country would, quote, take revenge for this horrible crime. In Aleppo, Syria, residents remembered Suleimani's contribution to their fight for liberation from foreign-backed extremist fighters.
The martyr Soleimani had a role in liberating most of the Syrian territories. He also played a role in Iraq and Yemen. He was wherever he needed to be. The free and resistant world has lost one of its men today.
To discuss the Trump administration's push to war with Iran, I spoke earlier with Daniel McAdams, the executive director of the Ron Paul Institute. Thanks so much for joining me this afternoon, Daniel. The president ran on a platform promising to end what he called stupid wars. What do you believe drove him to murder a top Iranian military commander and risk starting a war with Iran?
Well, he ran on a platform to stop stupid wars, but he surrounded himself with stupid people. So that's what happens, unfortunately. The neocons who lied us into the Iraq War I and II are back. They've never gone away. They've told the same lies. Trump, unfortunately, the one thing he's been consistent on is Iran. He's been consistent in his animosity toward Iran, and he's surrounded by neoconservatives. They've been looking for an in. They convinced him that this maximum pressure policy would work, and it hasn't. In fact, it's backfired. It's put Iran closer to people they don't want them to be around. So the whole thing keeps failing, but the neocons only know one thing, which is to crank it up, to ramp it up, to move toward war. And they've been itching for this war for a long time.
Well, as you know, Major General Sulemani was responsible for leading the entire region's fight against the Islamic State, be it in Syria or Iraq. How is it possible that the U.S. sees him as an enemy? I mean, isn't he someone who technically fought on our side?
Well, I mean, if you're conspiracy-minded, you start wondering what our side is, quote unquote. It's the U.S. that backed a bunch of crazed jihadists in Syria to overthrow Assad. So you start to wonder, if some of these people are right, But it's it's a lot of propaganda. The U.S. government says, oh no, we took out ISIS, we took out Al Qaeda. It wasn't anyone else. It wasn't the Russians. It wasn't the Iranians. Assad, in fact, was supporting ISIS. And it's just all pure propaganda. And unfortunately, the American people, they just eat it up. You think it's quite disappointing on you because you think it after the Iraq War in 2003, after the lies on Libya, you'd think that people would just have some healthy skepticism. But, there they go again. There they go again. I guess they believe it because they want to believe it.
I was struck by a newspaper cover, I believe it was the New York Times, that was circulating on Twitter from 1998. And the headline was about President Clinton delaying his impeachment proceedings with an airstrike on Iran. And then further down in that same newspaper, there's a headline saying Netanyahu's government in Israel looks like it's about to fall. It's very similar headlines to what we could be reading right now. What do you make of that?
It is funny. I have a hard time. I've seen this in several places, but I think it's a little bit facile to say that Trump is doing this to divert attention away from impeachment because unless he knows something that we really don't, there aren't a lot of defections in the Senate. Okay, maybe the Senate majority leader is not going to run the trial that he wants to completely exonerate himself, but he's out of the woods. If you look at the Gallup poll that came out just after the impeachment vote, Trump actually gained some percentage points. So his numbers aren't tanking because of this impeachment. The American people are not super interested in the impeachment. So it just frankly doesn't make sense that this is the trigger that got Trump to go all out on Iran. Who knows?
And what about Netanyahu on the rocks?
Well, Bibi is on the rocks again, it seems, and it's interesting that I guess word has been given to Israeli officials that don't talk about this, keep this on the down low. I'm sure they're sitting there thrilled about it. I think Netanyahu had said something positive about Trump doing this. Trump has been doing Netanyahu's bidding. I don't need to tell you, Anya, since he got into office, moving the embassy, recognizing the Golan Heights as if it's his to recognize, et cetera, et cetera. This is a pattern. We did the Liberty Report today, and I kind of joked, the real quid pro quo is not Ukraine. The real quid pro quo is Sheldon Adelson. For $25 million, he gets everything he wants out of Donald Trump.
It reminds me of how Russiagate wasn't actually about Flynn dealing with Russia, but actually pressuring the Russians to make a vote at the UN on Israel's behalf. Israel was at the core of Russiagate, as well as well, people will say what's happening now with this strike on Iran, that there seems to be obvious pressure from Israel to go in this direction. But this is far from the first time the U.S. has taken aggressive action against Iran, which could have been considered an declaration of war. For example, it violated Iranian airspace with a military drone last summer. It seems as though it's always up to Iran to de-escalate. Why is that?
Well, this is the neocon plan, and you can look at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and all of the pro-Israel think tanks. From the very beginning, what they want to do is they want to get Trump to do a triggering event and have the Iranians overreact and do something that will allow a massive U.S. military response. And I think, I could be wrong, it seems to me as if the Iranians understand this. And for example, part of me expected to wake up this morning thinking that they had, taken some shots at a carrier group or something. But, to me at least, and it's not, a lot of other people are writing about this. Larry Johnson has a great piece out at the Six Semper Tyrannis blog. But the Iranians really will benefit from biding their time if they want to retaliate for a clear act of war. Not even act of war. It's like a gangland drive-by shooting. This is insane behavior from the U.S. government. But if they want to sit back and retaliate in their own way, they might even just take a cue for how they benefited from the 2003 war itself, which is pretty interesting. I think Larry Johnson wrote about this in his piece today, that Iran didn't direct the Shia militias in Iraq to attack the Americans early on in the war because they could see as things played out, everything was benefiting them. Everything was falling into their laps. And I think we're almost seeing this now, bar a few other unforeseen circumstances. The Iraqis would love to see the back of the Americans. There may be a vote. I've read that it's really up to Sadr to see if his 59 or so votes in Parliament will go by way of getting the U.S. out. And then what's Trump going to do if Iraq says, "Hey, get out. We want the American troops out. Oh, let's have Iraq War 3.0 and let's do Iran." That sounds really smart.
And it makes sense that Iraq would look to Iran as opposed to the United States, considering those two countries actually share a border. We hear President Trump, other Republicans and Democrats, as well as the mainstream corporate media outlets, describing Sulemani as a bad guy and claiming he killed countless Americans. What is your response to people who make these claims in order to justify the U.S.'s extrajudicial murder of a top Iranian official?
Well, I think with very, very few exceptions, all politicians are bad guys in some way or the other. But as we started out saying, the American people are so mindlessly propagandized. They're the most propagandized people on earth. And you have these masses now who had no idea that there was a guy called, Sulemani who even existed 2 days ago. Now they're experts on it. They're going to tell us all about it. But again, I hate to go back to this, but Larry Johnson, career CIA officer, he said this whole idea that the Quds forces and Suleiman himself were directly involved in telling the Shia militias in Iran to attack Americans is absolutely never proven. It's never been proven. It's fake. So this is the key. This is a key part of the propaganda that Americans are being told today. This guy killed a bunch of Americans. You know, the way the story would tell, he personally went down to the U.S. embassy and started, you know, firing rockets into it. You know, and all these sorts of things. There wasn't a single Iraqi there demonstrating in front of the embassy. They were all Iranians. And it's just the most mindless, and it seems that the more mindless the propaganda is, the more the American people just seem to lap it up. And you know, there was another great piece that Caitlin Johnstone, the Australian anti-war activist, wrote, and she blames a lot of it on Hollywood, and I think she makes a good point. You know, Americans are so mindlessly stuck on this absurd entertainment that they can only see the world in this bizarre binary, you know, black hats and white hats sort of thing, and they're just sort of incapable of understanding or of seeing any of the rest of the world, you know, through their eyes, through the other country's eyes. So it's really disheartening on you.
It's disheartening also. You're talking about the media making claims which you're essentially saying should be considered fake news, and yet Trump has called out the media throughout his entire presidency. The media has fought with the president, and yet when there's a bombing and attack like this on a sovereign nation, they seem to unite and agree.
That's absolutely true. And with the exception of Tulsi Gabbard, who did a terrific video that I looked at earlier today, all the Democrats are lining up to push the propaganda. Oh, they'll say, oh, Trump, you shouldn't have done it that way. You should do it a little different. But good job. Thanks for killing this guy. He was worse than Hitler. You know, over and over.
I wanted to ask you in what ways both parties, the Democrats and Republicans, have abetted Trump's push a war for Iran.
Absolutely, and it's, you know, if you play the propaganda, if you go down the line about what a monster this guy was, he may be everything you're saying, but what you're doing is you're establishing a narrative that justifies his killing. You know, if the Democrats had any sense, and especially someone like Biden, who, okay, maybe you and I aren't going to buy it, but a lot of Americans will buy, hey, I was part of the Iran deal. I helped negotiate the Iran deal. The Iran deal was great. Trump's a moron for getting us out of it. He never should have killed this guy. It wasn't necessary. You know, going down that line instead of accepting the central theme that it's acceptable somehow to fly a drone and kill top military leaders. How would we feel what would we do if the Iranians flew a drone and killed Mike Pence or Mike Pompeo? You know, the idea that you can kill someone like that and say, well, let's de-escalate, as Pompeo said, it's just utterly absurd.
Well, the U.S. doesn't only attack Iran from the outside. It pressures the government in Tehran domestically through domestic means as well. You recently followed protests which rocked Iran very closely. What forces drove these demonstrations, and have they fizzled to a halt at this point?
Well, I think now they definitely have, because the country is united, but I think there's no question that yet once again the U.S. was behind it in one way or the other. Certainly they have proxy forces on the ground in Iran. They've got the MEK, who's always happy to lob a few bombs and kill a few innocent civilians here and there. And the MEK has the top politicians in Washington in their back pocket. All you do is add a couple of zeros to the check, and they'll come lapping it up. You know, they'll say whatever you want. But certainly the U.S. is involved. The U.S. was involved in the Green Revolution in 2009, and unfortunately, a lot of otherwise well-meaning people didn't accept that. They have this idea that they have to believe this fantasy that the people are rising up, you know, and it's always only the people that the U.S. government wants to overthrow. You know, remember in Syria when there were 5 times as many rising up in favor of Assad? Well, that didn't get reported because you only count as a person if you are bolstering the CIA narrative.
Right. Demonstrators in Chile or Colombia and Honduras are overlooked by the corporate media, which is obsessed by demonstrators in Hong Kong and Iran for some reason. Well, it seems as though the only hope for a resistance to endless U.S. wars, including a war with Iran, lies in the power of the U.S. public. What will it take to revive an anti-war movement in this country?
I wish I had a magic pill. You know, it's every single time. You know, it's Charlie Brown jumping for the football, and it's just so depressing. But you know, I think an effective anti-war movement has got to cross ideological boundaries. It's got to not be a left movement or a right movement. I think it has to, and this is what we try to do at the Ron Paul Institute, is reaching out way beyond ideological lines and saying there are a lot of differences we have on a lot of things, but this is kind of key to everything. This what's happening to our country, the militaristic foreign policy, how it impoverishes the working and middle classes and enriches the well-connected oligarchs. I think we can all agree on it. As to how to counter the propaganda, ironically, with the rise of the internet and social media and our ability to reach people, it seems that we're being squashed more now than ever. So it's kind of a mixed bag, I think.
It's difficult. That's something else I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned social media, and you're a very unique case because you're someone who is very active on Twitter, had a pretty large following, and then you were removed for calling Fox News host Sean Hannity a retard, correct?
Yeah, and it was a joke. I mean, if anyone's seen Napoleon Dynamite, I mean, I sort of sometimes take on that persona. It was a funny movie, and it was just a joke. I wasn't saying that the guy's handicapped and we should make fun of him because he's handicapped, but he's being stupid because he had a show all about the deep state and he's wearing a CIA pin. So that is stupid. And yeah, it's a kind of a childish way of saying it, but come on, in the scheme of things, turn on Twitter for 5 minutes and see what people say. It's just there's something funny going on there.
Well, what's the status of your account? Have you tried to appeal this? What's going on? Do you have any means when you're a person on Twitter and just get removed from the existence?
No, you don't. I've appealed 3 times, and it's the same sort of machine reply. There's not a real human, I guess, or they've just decided that enough is enough with me. I was banned temporarily with Peter Van Buren was banned forever, but with Scott and I were defending Peter, and it's happened a couple of times. But there really is no logic. There's no way of saying, hey, can I talk to someone? Can I explain it? Because this doesn't make any sense. Let me show you the facts. And so that's not the case. And so, the problem that I have is I kind of shot myself in the foot because I use my Twitter account not only to let off steam, not only to be able to criticize and to actually fact check people like Pompeo in real time, but I used it a lot for research. And I followed a lot of terrific people in Latin America and in the Middle East who are really sort of off the mainstream, off the radar screen, but really, really good, brave journalists. And I've lost all of that, and that's been the real damage, not just me being able to be sarcastic towards Sean Hannity.
Yeah, people might ask why you haven't opened another account, but when you're verified and you've already established a following, it's very difficult to build that back up again. So what are our options? I hear people say sometimes that perhaps these social media outlets should be nationalized, so at least the Constitution applies and people can say, this is my free speech. There are others who say we need to create our own platforms if we're outside of the mainstream media and challenging it. What do you think?
There's not an easy answer. My tendency is always away from government control because it's actually the government itself that doesn't want people like you and me to be able to say what we do, which is to criticize them. So they're kind of the last people I'd like to have in control. I don't know if there are legal means. I mean, I tend to think that Twitter violates its terms of service. If you look at if you look at how they explain the banning of someone like me or people like me, and the non-banning of people who will literally call for the murder or literally celebrate the murder of people, including our own president, then there's a sort of a breach of implied contract. And I'm not an attorney, but I don't know the answer. Maybe an alternative, to Twitter can reach critical mass. Right now, there's nothing that has reached critical mass, and no one wants to go and log in and hear crickets. So it's really a bad situation right now.
Where can people follow you now if they want to catch your opinions?
Well, certainly the Ron Paul Institute website, ronpaulinstitute.org, and Dr. Paul and I do a daily a broadcast live at noon Eastern time on YouTube. I hope they'll let us continue, but that's just at Ron Paul Liberty Report, Monday through Friday. Friday is more economic. Monday through Thursday is Dr. Paul and I talking about foreign policy.
Well, there will be no shortage of topics for you next week, I'm sure, and we will stay in touch and keep following the story as well. Daniel McAdams, Executive Director of the Ron Paul Institute, thanks a lot for your time.
Thanks, Anya.
you.